Tracy One, thank you for joining me for this podcast. And I was looking at your website, The Invisible Stories, and I did note that it did start with someone else, Jamie Hall.
Yeah, a good friend of mine. We had brainstormed that project together, but she very quickly realized that she didn't have the capacity at the time to devote to the project. So she, I think, did one post with me and then was like, you know what, over to you.
So
So
you've
yeah,
taken over parenting responsibilities for this
yes,
website, I think.
yes.
So I'd like to find out actually what was the inspiration to start it, because it's been going now since 2017, which is, funnily enough, as long as I've been doing YouTube and fragrance social media as well. What spurred you on to start writing about perfume?
So at the time, I remember thinking that there were lots of cultural conversations happening around beauty, fashion, makeup, et cetera, all of these industries that seem to be very much closely linked to fragrance. And yet, in fragrance, there wasn't any destination for in depth, interesting conversations around our relationships to scent, as it pertains to emotions or cultural relationships or slightly more in the margins approaches to fragrance. At the time, there was a lot of mass, YouTube reviewers who were talking about fragrance very much in the um, panty dropper, lady killer, beast mode types of yeah. Yeah, those types of conversations, and I just felt like there was a hole for the more enriching and, to me, more meaningful conversations. So that was what inspired the website, and at the time, I think a good reference for where we wanted to go was there was a blog called Into the Gloss, run by what is now perceived to be a slightly toxic girl boss who is the CEO of Glossier, a very revolutionary makeup company. But Into the Gloss had all of these like interviews with people about the beauty products that they were using. They had features with celebrities, and it was like very much of the time. And so we were thinking of approximating something like that, but it never really headed in that direction.
And just going back a little bit to the inspiration and what you were seeing at the time, relating to, I do love that your website is called The Invisible Stories, because it's kind of the perfect way to describe perfume and scent, the way it affects some people. And do you? I really like that you do have a focus on the sort of a more intangible side of how perfume interacts with a person, or how people interact with scent. Do you feel like there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of the way people are describing perfume, especially to a novice or someone that's new to perfume?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And since I started the website, I've pivoted more to focus on content creation on TikTok. And on TikTok, I've really observed a trend in how people talk about fragrance in what I can only describe, and I don't mean this as a judgment, I think it's just a personal preference, in the most high level, to me, superficial ways. You hear a lot of, "Oh, it smells so delicious, it smells great, it makes me feel so sexy," and it's a lot of the same attributes that you hear over and over again. Um, and I do think that that's not whoever is doing the review's fault, it's a lack of language that we have around scent, and a lack of confidence that we have around our language. in terms of being able to smell something and then conjure up something that we feel confident about. Even to this day, like after 10 years of collecting fragrances and smelling things, if I don't have like a list of notes to reference, I get very panicky. I smell something and I'm like, is that what I smell? You know, and there are situations in which I've definitely tricked myself into thinking there was something in a fragrance because I had a memory of reading that there was something in the fragrance. Um, or like I'm primed to think that there's something in the fragrance, even though there's not. I think impressions of scent are so intangible and so hard to feel accurate and confident about that it makes total sense to me that people who are just getting into fragrance and making content about fragrance are talking about it in such broad, general terms, you know, because it's a difficult thing to do.
So you touched on a couple of things there that I'm going to follow up on, but specifically, there's a couple of articles in the website that really got my interest when I was reading through. The first one was the expectation versus reality article that you posted when you ordered some sample or got some samples through Lucky Scent, and as we know, Lucky Scent, along with a lot of other different websites, have general descriptors of particular perfumes that they have there. And if I recall, you got some, I guess, non-perfume enthusiasts or people that aren't necessarily into perfume the way that we are to smell them and give their own description to how they smell. I found that really interesting, only because I've been really enjoying doing this. Like I've got a couple of teenage kids, and they get to smell my perfumes every now and then, and I really like hearing the way that they describe it without having that sort of I guess what's the word I'm looking for, that sort of standard vocabulary that people who get into perfume attain over time. And I just thought it was really interesting, a really interesting process to do. Did you find the same thing when you were testing it?
Yeah, what I learned from that experience is an approach that's more non-judgmental about scent and our perceptions of it. I realized just how personal scent references can be. And something that I always think about is I did a summer school in Grasse for 2 weeks a few years ago, and when I was there, we smelled eugenol, the synthetic for clove, and immediately so many people were like, "Dentist." And I don't have that reference because dentists, I guess here in Canada, don't use anything with eugenol in it, or dentist offices don't smell like it. Anyways, like that reference was completely lost on me, and yet so many of them said it with such confidence that I thought was fascinating. And so when I was doing the sample comparisons with my friends and asking them what they thought, and they would smell something like Cypriol, for example, and think it smelled like barbecue meat, which is like laughable when you think about the person writing the marketing copy for that fragrance who's like, "Oh my god, like I did not mean to aim for barbecue meat," and yet it's a completely legitimate and fair reception to that kind of smell. And so, yeah. Go ahead, go ahead.
You just reminded me something when you were telling that clove story during the summer school, because I also never understood the reference to dentists, and it must be, maybe it doesn't happen here in Australia at dentist clinic, but I do remember, this is where blind smelling things where possible is really great, like for not limiting what you're trying to describe. I remember smelling Serge Noir from Serge Lutin. Have you ever smelled that perfume?
A long time ago, I wouldn't be able to pull it up.
To me, the first time I smelled it without actually knowing what it was, that it was heavy clove. But at the time, I was smelling the clove, but I didn't actually connect that it was clove, and all I could smell was all the fruity aspects from the clove, the eugenol molecule, I guess it might have been from, and it literally reminded me of juicy fruit chewing gum. I don't know if you have that in Canada, but it was just a weird thing, because then once I did find out what the perfume was, I realized that I was smelling the note of clove. But to
Mhm.
me, without knowing what the perfume was, without knowing what the note pyramid was, all I could smell was it's like this kind of synthetic fruitiness, which was really surprising to me. And I never have, and now I have that association with that particular note. Yeah, so I just thought that was interesting that you had a somewhat similar experience with other people thinking it was smelling like dentists.
Yeah, I think it's so much of it is based on where you come from and your own personal experiences, and I find those anecdotes really charming. Um, because I do think that in the industry, there's a level of judgment cast upon people who can't, quote unquote, accurately detect something. And as I said earlier, I'm even self-judgmental about it because I'm like, okay, I've been smelling for this long. I should know what I'm detecting. And yet I find the naive, almost childlike approach of smelling a fragrance and just like naming the first thing that comes into the top of your head really quite wonderful. And it helps you see a fragrance in a new way, especially if it's a fragrance that you know well, that a person that you're with is smelling for the first time. And they'll throw out references that you're like, "Oh, I didn't even think about this fragrance in this way," and yet it's totally legitimate, right? So I find that really sweet. I've really enjoyed those experiences.
Absolutely, and even even though you're smelling something that you absolutely recognize, I don't know if this happens to you, but sometimes I am smelling something that I've smelled before, and I just cannot, my brain cannot make the connection to what it is until I read that the note is in there sometimes, you know, and then that's all I can smell. And there's, but I think there's that is a kind of bias, if you like. I think this is when note pyramids can sometimes heavily influence the way people are smelling, because it's almost like you're being told what you should be smelling, and somehow your brain sort of takes over and makes you smell that particular accord or note. Do you get that sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a version of being primed. I get that a lot in wine, um, especially because I love to read the labels of wines before I drink them, and then all I'm doing when I'm drinking the wine is looking for the notes or the attributes that it's mentioned on the label. Just because that's how my brain is wired, and I think there's so much merit in blind tasting and blind smelling, like you were saying, and removing that level of expectation or judgment or even a frame of reference, and just walking into it completely, innocent and seeing what you get out of it. I think the takeaways are often surprising and not at all like what's written on the website or on the bottle or, in the copy.
Definitely some benefits, because I mean I've found some absolute perfume loves from blind smelling them. Whereas if I'd known, they would have been perfumes that I probably would never have approached, just purely on what I'd read and seen about them. So, but I mean, obviously, you need really good friends who are willing to send you unidentified samples. But this is one benefit of being in the fragrance community. Still on the subject of describing fragrances, another article that I really enjoyed on the website was one about where you describe how some singers' voices might smell like. Uh,
Mhm.
and particularly the way you described Nina Simone's voice was really connected with me. Do you often use other sort of sensory descriptors to smell something?
Yes, and part of that, I think, is in being a writer, and having to pull for references because there's such a poverty in terms of actual scent descriptors. So that's one aspect of it, and another is I do believe there's like I'm not calling myself synesthetic. I've always wanted to have synesthesia, like, since growing up, I wanted that as a personality trait. But I do think there are some references that occur to me, without thinking. So I think there's a purity there that's not motivated by this desire to seem interesting. Like, I smell certain things and they'll remind me of other things, and so Nina Simone, um, her voice has always reminded me of, like, dark, jammy things, um, with a bit of spice and a bit of, like, edge, and thorniness, you know? So that was one voice that was very clear to me, and then today I was smelling Jour de Fête from L'Artisan Parfumeur. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah. So it's this very, like, ethereal, wheat and almond fragrance that Olivia Jacobetti made for L'Artisan, a few years ago and has since been discontinued, but I have this little decant here that I treasure. I was smelling it and I was like, "This is definitely like a light female voice," and then my brain went to Billie Eilish, and that was the end of that. You know, once you have the association, it's a little bit hard to, like, dissociate, I find. Yeah.
I mean, and it's not just. I definitely wouldn't describe myself as being synesthetic either, and I wish I was. But I definitely there are some perfumes that I smell in an oral audio sort of kind of way, or I guess it's really difficult to sort of communicate different senses in the way you perceive it. But we're talking about smell, but some smells to me are very based on like an audio spectrum. Some are very visual and colorful. Like, you know, there are certain hues and shades to perfumes, and others are just pure sort of emotion or a particular imagined scenario. Do you have a way, like a sort of more common way in how you perceive your very favorite perfumes that you really connect to and love? Have you been able to identify like a common thread in why you particularly, love these particular perfumes?
I do have an answer for this question, but I don't know that it is clarifying. My favorite my favorite perfumes have always smelled like poems to me, and that is the reference or the brief that I always give perfume stores when I walk in and they're like, "What do you wanna smell?" And I say, "I wanna smell scents that smell like poems." And for the most part, it's obviously up to the person who's, there to help me and what they think that means, but I've never been disappointed. Once I asked Sunday, mutual friend Sunday Smells, for her references or her recommendations based on that same prompt, and she gave me Chris Ruzak's Bluer Skies Whenever You're Around as a thing that I should smell, and honestly, when I smell that scent, I burst into tears because it was such a personal and evocative scent to me, because of the strength of jasmine that they, used in the scent. So she nailed it. I mean, she really got the brief, and often when I'm in perfume stores and I say that, the people who are there understand what I mean, even though they don't fully know what I mean. It's kind of this intuitive understanding. It's interesting.
So, without going into too much detail, because it's obviously like a personal thing, but the fact that you did sort of get emotional when you smelled that particular perfume. Did you understand why at the time? Like, did you understand why it was making you feel that way?
Yeah, yeah, and only because jasmine is a very personal note for me. As a child, that was one of the first scents that I remember smelling, and it's very intimately associated with a family member that I loved very much growing up. And so certain iterations of jasmine will immediately do that to me. Not all of them. Like the funkier, more indolic jasmines I appreciate, but they don't have that feeling. It's almost like the key isn't right enough for the lock, but then some perfumes really have the right key, and so they immediately just unlock that feeling. It's very, very strange.
Absolutely love stories like this. I mean, and you did preempt my one of my next questions, which was if you do recall what your earliest scent memories were. So, were there any others apart from the jasmine that you associated with someone that was really close to you? Do you remember growing up noticing or really other scents sticking with you through the rest of your life?
Mm. You know what's funny is, my household was mostly scentless. My mother was very against perfume, she's very sensitive, and never liked it when we used scented products or anything like that, so not really, but I have this distinct memory of when I was 12 or 13, we went on a trip, a camping trip, and when we came back, someone had broken into my house, and stolen some computers and things like that, but what I remember thinking was the smell of my house was gone because they had left some of the doors open and the house had had time to aerate, and I mean, in my house, it always smelled like food. My dad loved to cook and, Chinese cooking is quite redolent. Um, so that smell of, like, grease and garlic and chilies and things that had permeated my home was gone, and I found that very bizarre.
I'm curious because I mean, if you so you grew up with that smell in your house, and then one day you walk in, and it's gone. I can imagine that it would almost feel like you've lost something, not just obviously the things, the material things that got stolen, but it's almost like they've taken away like that whole not memory, but just that whole association of being home.
Yeah, it really did feel like a violation, that was more profound than, like, whatever they took at the time, which I don't even remember anymore. Maybe a computer on which I had written some fan fiction. Um,
Okay, Tracy, I can tell you that when I was 13, there were no computers in the houses.
I think I had just entered the stage of, like, dial-up, and being on internet communities. But yeah, it felt like a really private thing was taken away from me. I remember thinking it was exactly the feeling of when I was younger and my grandparents would wash my blankie, and they would give me the blankie again, and it would smell like nothing. It was betrayal on the highest level because that smell is so personal.
Yeah, exactly. And even I get the same thing like when it's colder and I wear scarves in winter, and obviously it's sort of the whatever perfume you're wearing sort of imprints onto the fabric, and then you wear it again. I mean, I don't very often wash scarves, but I love putting them on again after a while and smelling whatever perfume that was that I wore that time. I did it. So I can imagine it's the same thing. It's just a very comforting, familiar thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you agree that there's no perfume that's ever going to be as good as whatever you pick up on your scarf after, like, a month or 2 of wearing it? There's honestly no perfume.
Because it's completely random. Like there's no way you can identify what perfume is on there, which how many you wore over whatever many days, and you're right. It's like almost the perfect accidental layering combination.
Yeah, it's wonderful how that works out. You can't achieve that by dumping a bunch of perfumes together, I've tried.
I'm actually too scared to even experiment with layering. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of the purist in me, or like I just love the fact that a perfume, if I love it, it was created to smell like it smells and not be sort of tainted, not tainted, but not meant to be with another perfume. And that's purely my own personal opinion. But for all the people who like layering,
I identify with that. I'm not much of a layerer either. On TikTok, there's always a person asking you, "What should I layer this with?" And I'm like, "I cannot help you. I respect a perfume as a complete sentence. Like, I don't I don't think you need to add anything to it." But yeah, it is a purist approach for sure.
so do you actually remember the very first bottle of perfume you bought for yourself?
The very first bottle of perfume I bought for myself is different from the very first bottle of perfume I begged my dad to buy me. Uh, the first one was Ralph by Ralph Lauren, a very fruity, like a light fruity musk, but, it was such an achievement for me to get it because I had spent so long trying to convince him to buy it for me that, like, held on to it like a precious jewel. It's still in my parents', bathroom. Still smells mostly the same, which is crazy.
The very same bottle?
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like, it smells wearable still, like, I don't remember exactly what it smelled like when I first opened it, but it smells wearable, which is wild. I can only imagine what kind of musks are being used in a fragrance like that. And then the second part of your question was which perfume I bought myself, and that was Burberry Brit by Burberry, a very lovely, um, gourmand. There's an iced lime note, I wanna say they call it. It's lime and almonds, but it's really lovely.
Do you still, and I mean, the follow up to that is, do you actually still enjoy wearing it? Because I, I'm guessing that this would happen to a lot of people who buy, their first perfumes and then maybe fall into that rabbit hole of, wow, there's all of these perfumes that I can buy and try, and then have a bunch of bottles in their collections, and they don't necessarily love the very first thing that they once used to love. But do you
Yeah.
still have that affection for Burberry Brit?
I have an affection for it, I don't wear it anymore because I bought it at a time when I was living with my best friend, and it reminds me of that time, but now she's taken over that scent, so I'm no longer allowed to wear it. But I associate it with her, which I think is just as lovely. And I, of course, now have 1,000 options to choose from on any given day, so I don't need that one as well.
Just speaking of that, I was about to ask you. I don't know if you meant 1,000 literally, but what does your bottle collection actually look like at the moment in terms of numbers?
It's not a ton. It's less, fewer, I guess, than someone might guess for someone who's been collecting for so long. I would say full bottles under 50.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe 30.
lots of samples and decants, I'm guessing.
Oh, that is I can't count that. Yeah, yeah. Behind me, which you can see, are just, like, ADHD piles of, samples, decants, things that I've been gifted by brands, things that perfumer friends have sent me, and then, like, the full bottles are in a dark drawer somewhere else, but
Well, I mean, I'm sure that you and I are not alone in this scenario with having a ton. Like, I'm literally staring at a couple of boxes of samples that I've not even sprayed once. But do you actually have like a conscious process of testing perfumes, given that that's part of what you do, what you need to do to keep writing about it? Do you have an actual process, or is it all totally random, where you pick something up once, spray it, and then you go, oh well, I might test this more and write about it? How does it work for you?
It's very much based on my whims, I guess. I go through long, I would say, droughts where I don't wear perfume at all. For a person who loves perfume so much, I wear very little. Like, I don't remember the last time I wore something. Um, this week, I don't know that I have. And it really is just like when the inspiration strikes, or most accurately, it's when I need to be somewhere else, but I can't go somewhere else. That's when I put on a perfume, because I find that it creates a reality or a set of emotions immediately that I wasn't experiencing prior to putting it on. It's like the emotional equivalent of getting a haircut or going to therapy or getting a tattoo. You're just like you're flipping a switch on a reality. So that's when it happens to me the most.
And it doesn't even have to be. It doesn't even have to be an actual real scenario, or like it sometimes. I find the same thing, that perfumes can either take me back to a particular time or place, or just create this whole almost fantastical sort of imaginary sort of persona, or mini world that I'm living in for that particular few hours. So you get the same thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same impulse as like wanting to stand in front of a painting, right? You want like an artful stimulus that's beyond, what you were experiencing before that moment. It just happens to be invisible, as we were talking about.
Do you have a recollection of? I mean, and you don't have to go into detail about what it was, but what was the last perfume that really made you sort of feel that way, that you might be able to recall?
It's interesting that you ask that, because the last perfume is also the first perfume, and what got me into all of this in the first place, which is Byredo's Pulp. Are you familiar?
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
actually really like pulp. Yeah.
I love pulp. It's always been super evocative, very poem-like, to me. And so 10 plus years ago, I was working next to a department store and walked in and got a sample of pulp, and it lit up my brain in ways I didn't think were possible. I felt this like really strong urge to write about it, and I think that day I started a perfume blog, which I did not maintain, just to write about pulp. And for 10 years, I did not get a bottle of it or smell it or do anything like that, because that moment felt so precise and precious and magical to me that I was like, I don't want to disrupt whatever this is. I want to just keep it in its little like treasure trove of memories and just let it go. But then my friend Jamie, the one who started the website with me, saw somewhere that they were discontinuing pulp. And knowing how much I loved it, she sent me a screenshot of that information, and I panicked. I went into like hoarding mode in a way that I'm not proud of, because I'm very like anti hoarding. I'm like, perfume is transient, let it go, but I could not let this one go. And so I immediately went on like all of the Facebook fragrance groups that I'm in and like posted in search of, asking if anyone had a decant or bottle. And then someone happened to be selling a bottle, so I got one. So yeah, I've been thinking about that fragrance a lot this summer since I got it, and it makes me feel the same thing I did like 10 years ago, which is incredible. And I'm so glad that I still feel that way, because sometimes the door closes and it's like that meaningfulness is no longer felt, but it's been preserved. So I love that.
It's definitely. I mean, from my personal perspective, that perfume is really nothing but joy. Like all I get is Technicolor when I'm wearing it. There is nothing sort of it's all happy feelings when I'm wearing that perfume. And I know people might smell it and think it's sort of loud and garish, but like it's exactly what it needs to be. Like, and as long as you're right for that, if your mood is right for that smell, I mean, it's really good. I didn't realize it was discontinued.
So, word on the street is they were stopping production, and then when I posted about this on TikTok, someone called the store in a panic and asked. I didn't fact check this, I was just like a horse with blinders on, I needed to move on this information, factual or not, but someone called a Byredo store in New York, and they confirmed it. I don't know when it's happening, I don't know if they've reversed that decision since, but that is the information that I got.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll keep my eye out because there's one place that has Byredo here, and I'm pretty sure last time I looked, they still had a bottle of pulp, and it might have just been the tester. But now I'm curious. You have some really good interviews on the website as well, Tracy. Is there someone like? Do you have someone on the top of your wish list in the perfume world? It could be anybody
Mm.
that you could speak to. Who do you think that person might be?
It would have to be Jean-Claude Elena, I think. Just because I've loved his fragrances for so long. He's my, like, ride or die perfumer. I love him. For the most part, I love his perfumes. I just smelled his most recent release, and it did not convert me. Yeah, heaven can wait. Uh, yeah, so I have trouble with iris and carrot seed. They're always 2 notes that I find very difficult to overcome in a perfume, and I was like, "If anyone can do it, it's Jean-Claude." So I went to, Holt Renfrew, which is the place where the, Frederick Mall counter is here, and I was so excited to smell it, being like, "You know what? This is the one that's gonna change the game for me." It did not. I was so disappointed.
I kind of had a similar level of excitement for the previous Frederick Malle, which was the one that Maurice Roussel did. Now I can't even. Uncut Gems, Uncut Gem, and I was very like you were excited about smelling Heaven Can Wait. I was very excited about smelling Uncut Gem, and I was deeply disappointed with that one as well.
I haven't smelled that one, but I did hear a lot of people express that excitement and then follow it up with that disappointment.
I mean, they're also two of my favorite perfumers, but you know, as we know, they can't make not everything can be a masterpiece.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think just certain, fragrances will just never do it for certain people, and that's okay too. I'm starting to learn that. Some people just hate something, and that's fine. It's very, who am I to tell someone that a scent that they hate is more worthwhile than they think it is, you know? It's all totally up to their nose.
Yeah, this is one thing that I've always I still find fascinating. Well, I mean, it's fascinating only in that it really shows you like how personal scent and your taste in scent can be. That people kind of have well, in general, some people can be a little bit defensive when something that they like is not liked the same way by somebody else. Yeah, it's kind of that part of it is fascinating to me. That real connection to your own identity, I guess. Like if someone doesn't think it's as great as you, then there's this kind of implication that there's something wrong.
Yeah. I was reading this article about taste and how bizarre it was that taste is both assumed to be entirely subjective, but also hierarchical at the same time. Like, it exists in both planes where it's, like, flat, but also a hierarchy, and for some reason, we've never reconciled the 2, and so we can say, "Oh, everyone has different taste," and, like, accept that as a truth, but then we also cannot accept that someone's taste is different than our own or, isn't better or worse. It's very bizarre.
Well, if I might get you, if you can, if you still know the article, maybe send me a link and I'll put it in the description of the podcast if anyone wants to read it as well.
Yeah, I'll find it for you for sure.
Um, I did have something else I wanted to ask you, Tracy. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes.
Sure.
So we obviously spoke about your Holy Grail interview subject being Jean-Claude Helena. What about, are you someone that has a perfume Holy Grail? Like, have you smelled everything that you've wanted to smell so far?
What a big question. It's a really in
Really not talking about something that hasn't been created, but like, is there a not, either something that you want to smell that you haven't had a chance to smell, whether it be a vintage version or something that's been discontinued, or a bottle that you would like to own one day?
Yeah, I think the list is endless in terms of stuff that I wanna smell. I'm, an equal opportunity smeller. I just love novelty, I think, and so I'm always on the lookout for new things to smell. Everything interests me is the problem, so, like, I'm not very discerning when it comes to, styles or, like, is it indie, is it niche, is it mass? Like, I just like, sniffing things, but there's a perfume that I know our mutual friend Josie has in multiples, L'Arte de Gucci, I wanna say. Never smelled it. I've tried to bribe her to send me a decant, but it's very precious to her, and I would understand why she wouldn't, but, yeah, she talks about it in such a reverent way that I said to myself, "I must know what this feels like."
I'm going
Um,
to need to do some research. That's the first I've heard of that particular perfume.
I may have gotten the brand wrong, to be honest. L'Arte de something, but, I can follow up with that information as well. But it's just an example of, like, if someone that I love and respect likes something and they have a relationship to it, back to, I think, the original purpose of the website of just understanding what people love about fragrance and the role that it plays in their lives. Whenever I hear a story about a good perfume, I must smell it. I must understand, you know? And often I don't have the same response, and that's totally fine, but I think it helps you understand people better when you understand what they like, and you experience things that they love. Just like if someone, close to you is like, "This is my favorite song, please listen to it." I usually listen to it because I wanna understand what they mean, and even if I don't understand what they mean, I wanna be able to see where they're coming from and know the elements that they really love about that thing, you know?
It's just a deeper way of getting to know a person. I can't see it any other way. Like they're sharing something really personal with you without sharing something personal about themselves in a verbal kind of way or trying to articulate it in any way. Yeah, so I love that aspect as well about this whole, for want of a better word, hobby. I don't know. I feel weird calling it a hobby sometimes. It's like, what, I don't know how you feel about that and the terminology you use when people outside of perfume ask you about your love of perfume, the fact that you write about it, that you collect bottles, like how do you describe that to the layperson?
I call it a life interest. Um, just because it's just because, I think when you say it's a hobby or it's an interest, people for some reason have this assumption that it's a passing one. Um, and it's not. Like it's been a lifelong curiosity and interest of mine. So yeah, that's how I describe it. I don't like the word enthusiast or even though I've used it, I'm sure in my life because it's a good shorthand. I don't like enthusiast or obsessive or aficionado or collector. None of them feel right to me because it's like beyond collecting, it's beyond reviewing, it's beyond enthusiasm or passion, you know? Like all of those words feel reductive. So lifelong interest feels like the most accurate and all-encompassing way of describing it, I think.
I'm just obsessed.
That's another one of those, like, TikTok words, right? It's like, "Oh, I'm just obsessed with the smell," or whatever it is.
Well, before I let you go, because like the time has really flown already, so we've obviously been having a great conversation, Tracy. But before I let you go, I want to come back to you mentioned earlier about the perfume community on that's another term that I don't like on TikTok
Mhm.
and the different what differences have you noticed like in terms of social media like compare when you're looking at TikTok compared to something like Instagram and then YouTube is a whole other thing again like what are the observations that you've made?
That's an interesting question, and I will caveat my answer with my algorithm is very specific, and so my observations are going to be very biased and limited to what I've seen because of what TikTok has shown me. But I think they're very distinct, quote unquote, communities online for fragrance, and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok are completely different universes. Um, YouTube, I'm afraid of the YouTube fragrance community, I'll be honest with you. I know you're on there. You're one of the few on there that I can watch because there's a lot of it's ungenerous to say toxic, but I will say it anyways. A lot of toxic frag com bros on YouTube, and I don't wanna, like I don't wanna taint my algorithm, so I can't watch them.
And
Um,
you obviously have to be careful about saying Fragcom bros while Google's on because they're going to start sending you
yeah.
recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah, once in a while, Jeremy Fragrance will come onto part of the universe, and I'm like, "No, can't engage, gotta scroll." Although, sometimes curiosity gets the best of me. He is a very strange character. So YouTube, I find skews male, skews, performance obsessed. Um, the usage of perfume as a sexual tool, or sexual weapon, some might say, versus, as something that you're wearing for yourself. Instagram, I find my corner of it, again, to be very literary. There's lots of writers on Instagram, which is funny because, it's predominantly a visual platform, but I do find that, like, the writers have gravitated to perfume Instagram. And then TikTok is a younger subset of people who are just getting into fragrance. It's a bit more carefree, a bit more, I'm just having fun and I'm smelling things that, um, make me happy and get me compliments and uh, remind me of my favorite pop star, like if it's a Harry Styles fragrance, for example. Um, and it seems to be more categorized in like the beauty style world. Um, and not so much the I wanna get laid world, and also not so much the this is an art, and a form of creative expression world, although there are, of course, exceptions on all of these platforms, but that's been my observation so far.
it's very enlightening because I mean, I would agree based on what I've seen as well. I just find, and maybe I'm probably showing my age here. It's like I find the whole process of trying to edit reels or TikToks a lot of work. I don't even know how much time people spend doing them, but I mean, some people put in a lot of effort, and they're fun to watch most of the time. So, yeah. But that was really interesting.
Yeah, just some anecdotal evidence from someone who likes to observe people, but yeah.
Well, Tracy, it has been like my great pleasure to talk to you and meet you. Thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to talk about yourself and perfume. And I've really enjoyed it. And hopefully we can do this again another time, perhaps.
I would love that. Thank you for having me on. It's been such a pleasure talking about it and finally meeting someone that I've been Instagram friends with for years.
Thank you. All right, Tracy, thanks very much. Everyone, please check out the Invisible Stories website, which I'll leave a link to in the description. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Bye.